love glory. The glory of our athletes, our artists, musicians, actresses, actors, performers, writers, poets, famous business people, and the wealthiest of our people. We enjoy their pageantry, the opulence. They have beautiful architecture, nationwide celebrations, awards, ceremonies, record keeping, and all kinds of such things that honor these different kinds of people. The text for this message begins with God's glory and then goes on to show the amazing fact that unlike human glory that cannot be passed on to anyone else, God's glory exists to be transmitted to others, like the disciples of Jesus who would conduct God's life-in-life ministry beyond the Lord's time on earth. Special attention is given to the kind of human life that spreads divine life to others. So stop this presentation now and read or listen to the passage before us in John 13 and 14. In verses 31 and 32, when Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man is glorified," he was reflecting back on the departure of Judas. But he was also looking forward to the glory that would be passed on to the sons of men. Judas's deceit would lead to his death, but it would also lead to eternal life for all who believe. The Lord's glory was God's life within him. It was not just a feature of his divine life. It was a summation of all the features of divine life, glory. It was God's life in all its perfection. That life in Jesus had glorified the Father, and that life in the Father had glorified Jesus. Now, on to the amazing fact, however. The glory of God's life was meant to be passed on to his people. In verses 33 and 35, Jesus announced his departure to a place unapproachable to the disciples. They could not go where he was going in verse 33, but they could become what he had been. So to prepare them, Jesus gave them the new commandment. Love one another as I have loved you. That's in verse 34. Later, in chapter 14, he would challenge them likewise to love him in that same way. The disciples would bear the glorious life of the Father with its greatest manifestation being agape love. The departure of God's love in Christ on earth would result in God's love in the disciples. The commandment was new. The divine love of which he spoke had no resemblance to human loves, which resulted in small life practices, but not big life presence. The old commandments fit an old world and time. This new commandment was for the new world and time. It's the now with which Jesus had started his declarations of verse 31. From this time forward, things would be different. His little while with them in verse 33 would be multiplied many times over in the rest of human history, because God's life in his human life would become God's life in millions. These first 5 verses of our passage prepare us to look at the significance of the rest of the passage, where we see how the disciples responded to these life-in-life possibilities for ministry. 4 men responded. They were Peter, Thomas, Philip, and Judas, the son of James, not Judas Iscariot. So what do their responses show us about these future life-in-life men in continuing ministry? Let's look at that. Personality studies have always intrigued me. Using the familiar, though simple, 4 basic personality types describing action, thinking, social, and steady type people, I am struck by the possibility that one of these 4 types was demonstrated in each of the 4 men that we're looking at in this passage. And the Lord's reply to each of these men shows his sensitivity to their unique personalities as he prepared them for life-in-life ministries. That's the way he is sensitive to us today. Not unexpectedly, Peter jumped right into the situation. He asked, "Lord, where are you going?" He didn't ask how the disciples could love the way Jesus had just commanded them. Catching Peter's desire for action, Jesus told the disciples that they could not follow him where he was going. Peter jumped in again and said, "Lord, why can't I follow you? I will lay down my life for you." You see, Peter was like action-type people. He wanted to do something. But notice that he avoided the subject of love and of life. And many of us are like Peter. Jesus replied again to Peter and warned him that he would disown Jesus 3 times. Why? That would be the result of his need for action, when the action was human life operating without divine life. To go in the strength of human personality alone was not the kind of going that Jesus sought for life in life ministry. What he sought began with God's life and his love, and he still seeks such going. By connecting the glory of God's life and love to God's way in John 14, 1-4, Jesus showed his sensitivity to Peter's love of action. God's way understood would correct Peter's way misunderstood. Jesus explained that he was going to prepare things so that the glory of God's life and love could come to those who believe in him. He had already shown the life and love of God. Now he had to go in order to send that life and love to them and to others. The Lord made it clear that he would prepare the way, and when he had done so, he would return and take them to be with him so they could be with me where I am. Now, I don't think Jesus was talking about preparing a place. That is the usual explanation of the commentators, with heaven being the place. And I thought that way for a long time myself. But I think Jesus was talking about a sacred position more than a sacred place. During his time with the disciples, they had seen clear evidence of God's life in him, yet they had never received that full life in themselves. And so he held a sacred position they could not share. He had been with them in their small life-centered ways, accepting a position like theirs. The time would come when they would be with him in his big life-centered ways with a new sacred position. He was going away to prepare that new position, not heaven. So his promise to take you to be with me was not a promise to take them to the sacred position he had been holding. Was a promise to take them to the shared position that he had been holding. They would share life with him from that time onward. They would become children of God, just like he was the Son of God. So what was the Father's house mentioned in these verses? Many again think it was heaven. In Greek, however, the word was oikia, and that word was a reference to people bound together, a family. So don't worry, there are plenty of other scriptures that talk very plainly about heaven, and I believe in them fully. But here, however, Jesus was talking about the Father's family, a family defined by his big life. What about the many rooms? The Greek word was lonai, which refers to dwelling places. Thus Jesus said the Father's family has many dwelling places. Now, what are these many dwelling places for the life of that family? Now, I believe they are human lives. Every life a room for God's life. Jesus was preparing their lives to receive God's life. God's gospel intention had always been that his divine life would dwell in human life. And Jesus had just demonstrated this message practically. He had prepared the room they were in for his occupation with them. And in the same way, he would prepare their lives and the lives of all who believe for God's indwelling life. Then the ever doubtful, skeptical Thomas asked his question in verses 5 and 6. Thomas was like thinking type people. He asked, "How can we know where you are going?" We are like Thomas when we want to ensure we know the right things. But we face the same danger as Thomas when we want to satisfy our need for knowledge based on human life thinking, without seeking knowledge based on divine life. This was where Jesus made that remarkable declaration that we have all heard. that we've all known and loved. He said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Now he said this to Thomas, the conscientious, cautious, thinking type person. Jesus is the way to divine life, but he is also the way of divine life. He is the truth about divine life, but he is also the truth of divine life, because he is the life. But the danger for Thomas and for people like him and people like me is that we often want the truth about life, but fail to see the Lord's way to truth, and beyond that, his life itself. To prepare thinking type persons like Thomas, Jesus said, no one comes to the Father except through me. The only way to get to the divine family, to know the truth about that family and acquire the life of that family, is through Jesus Christ. Jesus then added words that brought Philip into the conversation. Jesus said, if you really know me, you will know my Father as well. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. That declaration sparked Philip's comment. He said, show us the Father, and we shall be satisfied. Philip, to me, demonstrated the social type personality. He was concerned for relationships. However, it seems that Philip had not been listening very well, because he could not connect his relationship with Jesus to a relationship with God the Father. Then Jesus answered Philip, showing his sensitivity in this case to all such social relational type personalities. In verse 9, Jesus described a relationship with the Father in terms of a relationship with him. He said this to Philip. In verses 10 and 11, he described a relationship with God based upon divine life, not just more human life, the way Philip was thinking about relationships. Philip did not understand the intended relationship of divine life and human life, and many believers still confuse that same kind of relationship. So now we look at verses 12 to 14. See, all three of these disciples missed the fact that Jesus was preparing their lives with their distinct personalities for the coming glory of God's life. When that family plan became a reality, the disciples would do even greater things than Jesus had done. Action for action types like Peter. Truth beyond their thinking for thinker types like Thomas. And relationships marked by life for social types like Philip. And in addition, all three of them could still bring their interests, comments, questions, and hopes to Jesus, just as they had been doing in this conversation. They could do so again in prayer. He said, you may ask me for anything, and I will do it. There was one condition. They had to ask in his name. They had to ask according to his glory and according to his life. Finally, however, there was the fourth disciple, and that was Judas, the son of James, introduced here in verses 21 to 24. Judas asked, why do you intend to show yourself to us and not to the world? This disciple resembled the fourth personality type, the steady, loyal type. Why do I say that? Steady type people like inclusiveness. At the same time, they like to be obedient. The Lord's reply to Judas showed his sensitivity to this personality type because he mentioned the word obedience. He said, anyone who loves me will obey my teaching. Now, steady type people are good at obeying, but they want to obey for the right reasons. Jesus took Judas back to what he had said about the new commandment of love. In a sense, Jesus said the right reason to obey is love. The danger for Judas and for those like him is that they can easily become satisfied with rules, plans, and organization, while excluding the glory of God's life and love in their understanding and in their ministry. So in summary then, this passage testified to the glory of God's life and love. It revealed the amazing fact that Jesus wanted to pass the glory of that life and love on to his disciples, and on to us. The Lord's answers revealed his awareness of their personality-driven interests. He began from where they were and offered hope in their own life-in-life ministries. Yet for each of them, and for all believers, and for us today, Jesus kept the message focused on the coming glory of God's life and love into their lives. That would change their actions, their thinking, their relationships, and their obedience. The glory of God's life would take them far beyond their human personalities. For us too, God knows us well. He knows what we are interested in, but he also knows what we need for effective ministry. He knows that we need the glory of God's life and love for life-in-life ministries. So some questions are appropriate as we conclude. Number 1, which of the 4 personality types may best reflect your life? Number 2, how is that personality type reflected in your Christian walk? What kind of questions do you ask? Number 3, in what ways have you accepted God's life and love into the unique life that is yours? And number 4, in what ways has the nature of your human life with its personality features hindered you from hearing, obeying, and surrendering to the Lord?